The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, forwarded 3 times through addresses Evelyn Hartwell no longer lived at. The last address, a cramped studio apartment on Morrison Street, had evicted her 4 months ago. The one before that, a friend's couch, where she'd overstayed her welcome. And the one before that, the house she'd shared with Trevor. Before the divorce papers arrived and everything fell apart. Now she lived in a 2008 Ford Escape with her 11-year-old daughter, Claire, parking in different Walmart lots each night, rotating locations so security wouldn't recognize the pattern. Homeless wasn't a word Evelyn used when Claire asked where they were going next. She called it an adventure. She called it temporary. She called it anything but what it was. The caseworker at St. Vincent de Paul handed her the mail with apologetic eyes. Beatrice Flynn had seen too many stories like Evelyn's college-educated women who'd done everything right until life decided otherwise. Layoffs, divorces, medical bills, evictions. The path from middle class to homeless was shorter than most people imagined, and Beatrice had watched hundreds walk it. "This one looks official," Beatrice said, sliding the thick manila envelope across the desk. "Law firm out of Pine Hollow, Oregon." Evelyn's hands were still cold from the morning. November in Portland meant sleeping in the car required 3 blankets and strategic positioning of the air vents. Claire had woken up coughing again, that dry hack that meant another respiratory thing was starting. They couldn't afford another clinic visit. The free clinic had a 3-week waiting list. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper. The return address read, Thatcher and Brennan Associates, Attorneys at Law, Pine Hollow, Oregon. She didn't know anyone in Pine Hollow. Didn't know any attorneys who'd want to contact her. For a moment, she thought it was another collections notice, some creative new attempt to extract money she didn't have from debts she couldn't pay. But collections agencies didn't use law firms with names like Thatcher and Brennan. "You going to open it?" Beatrice asked. Evelyn slid her finger under the flap. Inside were legal documents. Heavy stock paper with embossed letterhead. And beneath those, something else. Something that made her hands start shaking before she even understood why. A key. Old brass, tarnished dark with age. The kind of key that opened locks built before people worried about security systems and deadbolts. The kind of key her grandfather might have carried. The letter was brief, written in formal legal language that tried very hard to sound impersonal. "Dear Ms. Hartwell, you are hereby notified that you are the sole beneficiary of property left in trust by Warren Hartwell, deceased 1974. Per the terms of his last will and testament, said property was sealed for a period of 50 years and is now available for claim. Property consists of 1 mountain cabin and surrounding acreage, located in Pine Hollow, Cascade County, Oregon. Note: structure has been legally sealed since October 15, 1948. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange transfer of ownership. Sincerely, Edmund Thatcher, Esquire." Evelyn read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. Warren Hartwell, her brother, missing since 1974 in what the police called a car accident. He'd been driving home from work on a clear day straight road no other cars involved. The official story said he'd swerved to avoid a deer, overcorrected, hit a tree. His body was never found. The car had gone into a ravine, they said, and the river had carried him away. But Warren had been a careful driver, meticulous, the kind of man who checked his mirrors twice and signaled even in empty parking lots. And he'd left her a cabin, sealed since 1948, the year their grandfather Clayton disappeared. Beatrice was watching her face. Good news or bad news? I don't know yet, Evelyn said. There was more in the envelope, a smaller envelope unsealed with her name written in handwriting she recognized, Warren's handwriting. But that was impossible. Warren had been declared dead in 1974. This paper was new, fresh, not aged 49 years. Her hands were definitely shaking now. She opened it. The note inside was brief, just a few lines on plain white paper. Eve, they're still watching. Be careful. Trust no one outside family. The envelope was prepared years ago. This note was added per my final instructions. W. The handwriting was Warren's. She'd know it anywhere. Those careful letters, slightly right-leaning the way he'd signed birthday cards when she was small. The paper smelled like a fresh ream from Office Depot. The ink was modern ballpoint, not the fountain pen Warren had preferred. Someone had followed Warren's instructions. Someone had added this note recently exactly as Warren had planned decades ago, waiting for the right moment, waiting for Evelyn to inherit. Beatrice cleared her throat gently. Everything okay? There's a USB drive, Evelyn said. Her voice sounded distant in her own ears. She'd found it at the bottom of the envelope, one of those tiny thumb drives unmarked, except for a piece of tape with EH written in marker. You can use the computer in the resource room, Beatrice offered, if you need to. The shelter's resource room had 3 ancient Dell computers that took 5 minutes to boot up and ran some version of Windows the rest of the world had abandoned a decade ago. But the USB port worked. Evelyn plugged in the drive while Beatrice hovered nearby, pretending not to watch. One folder, labeled "For Eve Open When You Inherit." Inside a single video file, 23 megabytes, dated November 2022, just over a year ago. Evelyn clicked play. The video quality was poor, shot on what looked like a phone camera. The frame showed a hospital bed, pale green walls, medical equipment beeping quietly in the background, and in the bed, impossibly old, but unmistakably her brother was Warren. She'd never seen him old. The last time she'd seen him, she'd been 13 and he'd been 49. But the man in this video was ancient. 97, maybe 98. Skin like tissue paper stretched over bones. Eyes that had seen too much and held on too long. But those were Warren's eyes. That was Warren's face, aged into something barely recognizable, but still somehow him. Eve, honey. His voice was a whisper pulled from lungs that barely worked. If you're watching this, I'm dead. And 50 years have passed since I disappeared. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry for everything I couldn't tell you." The camera shook slightly. Someone else was filming. Someone Warren trusted. The cabin in Pine Hollow. Our grandfather's cabin. It's been sealed since 1948, since the night they killed him. Evelyn's hand moved to her mouth. Clayton didn't disappear. He was murdered. By Cornelius Holloway and Sheriff Marshall Brennan. Because he wouldn't sell them our land. Warren paused, breathing hard. The beeping in the background accelerated slightly. I knew. I've always known. I was 24 when they killed him. I tried to prove it. I tried to get justice. And in 1974, they came for me too. Another pause. Longer this time. The car accident. It wasn't an accident. They cut my brake lines. I survived. Catherine didn't. Catherine, Warren's wife. Evelyn had been too young to remember her clearly. Just impressions. A kind woman who'd smelled like vanilla and always kept butterscotch candies in her purse. They meant to kill me. The message was clear. Shut up or die. So I disappeared. Changed my name. Moved away. Sealed the cabin with instructions it couldn't be opened for 50 years. I waited. Waited long enough for them to think they'd won. Waited until you were grown. Waited until I was too old for them to bother with. And I planned. Warren's eyes focused directly on the camera. Directly on Evelyn across time and death. Inside that cabin is everything you need. The original land deed. The contract they tried to trick Clayton into signing. His journal. Evidence of murder and fraud that goes back 75 years. The land Holloway Development built their empire on. It's our land, Eve. It's stolen. And you can prove it. The beeping was faster now. A nurse's voice in the background concerned. I know what I'm asking. I know it's dangerous. But you're stronger than you think. You're Clayton's granddaughter. You're my sister. You're a Hartwell. And Hartwells don't back down. Warren's hand moved into frame, reaching toward the camera. His fingers were skeletal, trembling. The cabin has been sealed since October 15th, 1948, the day after they killed him. Inside, time stopped. Everything is exactly as Clayton left it. His journal will tell you where to find the rest. Where he hid the proof they couldn't get him to sign. The nurse's voice was closer now, insistent. I love you, Eve. I'm sorry I had to leave you so young. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. But now it's your choice. You can walk away. Sell the land, take the money, live your life. Or you can finish what Clayton started. What I couldn't finish. Warren's breathing was labored now. The video was running out of time. Either way, be careful. They've been watching that cabin for 75 years. They'll know when the seal breaks. They'll know when you show up. And they will not want you to find what's inside. His hand dropped. His eyes closed. Don't trust anyone connected to Holloway. Don't trust anyone named Brennan. And for God's sake, don't go to that cabin alone. The video ended. Evelyn sat motionless, staring at the frozen final frame. Warren's face eyes closed, looking like a man who'd finally put down a burden he'd carried for half a century. Beatrice had moved closer. "Evelyn, you okay?" "My brother," Evelyn said. Her voice sounded hollow. "That was my brother. He disappeared in 1974. The video's dated 2022. I know. That's not possible. I know. But it was Warren. She'd stake her life on it. That was Warren at 97, 98 years old, holding on to life just long enough to leave her this message. Living in hiding for 48 years. Planning everything. Her grandfather hadn't disappeared. He'd been murdered. Warren's car accident hadn't been an accident. He'd been targeted. His wife had died in his place, and Warren had spent nearly 5 decades in hiding, waiting, planning for this exact moment. "I need to make a phone call," Evelyn said. She had $47 in her pocket, a car that burned oil and needed new tires, a daughter who deserved better than sleeping in parking lots, and apparently a cabin full of evidence that could bring down a multi-million-dollar company built on murder and fraud. The smart thing would be to walk away. Call the law firm, sign whatever papers transferred. Ownership, sell the land to whoever wanted it. Take the money and get Claire into a real home with heat and running water, and a bed that didn't fold into seats. The smart thing would be to ignore Warren's message. Forget the video. Pretend she'd never seen her dead brother warning her about danger that had already killed 2 people in her family. But Evelyn had learned something in the past 4 months of homelessness. She'd learned that playing it safe didn't guarantee safety. That doing everything right didn't prevent everything going wrong. That the world would take from you whether you fought back or not. And she'd learned that she was tired of running. Tired of being afraid. Tired of telling Claire that tomorrow would be better when she had no reason to believe it. If Warren had held on for 75 years planning this moment, the least she could do was see it through. She called the number on the law firm's letterhead. A receptionist answered, professional and distant. Yes, Ms. Hartwell was expected. Yes, Mr. Thatcher could see her tomorrow if she could make it to Pine Hollow. The cabin paperwork was ready for signature. "I'll be there," Evelyn said. That night, she sat in the Ford Escape in a different Walmart parking lot. Claire asleep in the back seat under 3 blankets. The heater ran in intervals 10 minutes on 20 minutes off to conserve gas. Outside Portland drizzled its endless November rain against the windshield. Evelyn opened her laptop, an old Dell that took 5 minutes to boot up, and had a battery that lasted maybe an hour if she was lucky. She'd been keeping it charged at the shelter at coffee shops, where she'd buy a single cup and nurse it for 3 hours while using their Wi-Fi. She searched Clayton, Hartwell, Pine Hollow, Oregon. The results were sparse. A few genealogy sites. A mention in a 1948 newspaper article about a missing person. And that was it. Clayton Hartwell had disappeared from public record on October 14, 1948. Presumed dead. No body ever found. Case closed. She searched Warren Hartwell obituary. Nothing from 1974. But there was one from 2022. Brief, clinical. Warren Hartwell, 97, passed away peacefully at Cascade Hospice Center. No services planned. No survivors listed. No survivors. Because by then Evelyn had been out of touch for years. Homeless. Unreachable. Warren had died alone. And she hadn't even known to say goodbye. She searched Holloway Development Corporation. Now the results multiplied. Hundreds of hits. A real estate empire worth over $500 million. CEO Graham Holloway. 59 third-generation owner. Projects across Oregon and Washington. Luxury condos, shopping centers, resort developments. The company website showed sleek architectural renderings and smiling families in front of beautiful homes. Founded 1948. The same year Clayton disappeared. Evelyn clicked through to the company history page. There was a black and white photo of the founder, Cornelius Holloway, standing in front of a small timber office circa 1948. Distinguished looking, confident. The kind of man who wore expensive suits even in timber country. She clicked back to her search and added Cornelius Holloway Clayton Hartwell. Nothing. No connection. No mention of the two men together, but Warren had said it. Cornelius Holloway killed Clayton and built an empire on stolen land. Claire stirred in the back seat, coughing again. Evelyn reached back to adjust her blankets, feeling the heat of low-grade fever on her daughter's forehead. They needed to get her to a doctor. Needed antibiotics, probably. Needed things Evelyn couldn't afford. But if what Warren said was true, if the land was legally hers, if she could prove Holloway's ownership was fraudulent, she was getting ahead of herself. First, she needed to see the cabin, see what evidence actually existed. Figure out if Warren's 50-year plan was based on reality or the paranoid delusions of a traumatized man who'd lost his wife and spent decades looking for someone to blame. Except Warren hadn't seemed paranoid. Not in that video. He'd seemed weary, determined, like a man who'd carried a secret so long it had hollowed him out, and finally he could put it down. Evelyn closed the laptop. She had $80 now borrowed from Beatrice with a promise to pay it back double when she could. Enough gas to get to Pine Hollow. Enough for maybe 2 nights in the cheapest motel if they needed it. Not enough for much else. In the morning, they would drive east, into the Cascade Mountains, to a town she'd never heard of, to meet a lawyer she'd never met, to claim a cabin that had been sealed since before her mother was born. And maybe to finish something her grandfather started 75 years ago. The rain picked up, drumming harder on the roof. Claire's breathing was rough in the back seat. Evelyn set an alarm on her phone for 5:30, early enough to move the car before the parking lot security started their rounds. Then she closed her eyes and tried not to think about the warning in Warren's voice. They're still watching. They'll know when you show up. Sleep didn't come easy. The drive to Pine Hollow took 4 hours through winding mountain roads that climbed steadily east from Portland. The Ford Escape burned oil and made concerning noises whenever Evelyn pushed it past 60, so she stayed in the right lane, letting faster cars pass while watching the gas gauge drop with concerning speed. Claire sat in the passenger seat quieter than usual. The cough was worse this morning, deeper in her chest. Evelyn had given her the last of the children's Tylenol and made a mental note to find a pharmacy in Pine Hollow, if they had one. The town was small enough that Google Maps showed only a single main street. "Tell me again where we're going," Claire said. "To see a cabin that belonged to your great-grandfather, the one who disappeared." "That's right. Uncle Warren left it to you." Evelyn nodded. She'd told Claire a simplified version. Uncle Warren had owned property, now it belonged to them. They were going to see it. She hadn't mentioned murder. Hadn't mentioned the video or the warnings or the 50-year plan. Claire was 11. She'd been through enough. "Will we live there?" Claire asked. "I don't know yet, baby. We need to see it first. Is it better than the car?" The question landed like a fist. Evelyn's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Probably," she managed. "Most things are." Claire went quiet again, looking out the window at the passing forest. Douglas fir grew thick on both sides of the highway, that particular Pacific Northwest density where you couldn't see more than 20 feet into the trees. It was beautiful in a way that felt indifferent to human presence. These mountains had been here long before Portland, long before highways, long before the Hartwells. They'd be here long after. The sign for Pine Hollow appeared around a curve. Population 2,847. Elevation 3,200 feet. Founded 1889. The town itself was larger than Evelyn expected. Main Street ran for maybe half a mile, lined with the usual small-town collection of businesses. A diner, a hardware store, a pharmacy, thank God. And everywhere signs bearing the same logo, Holloway Development Corporation. New construction jutted up between older buildings. Condos with modern glass and steel architecture that looked aggressively out of place against the timber frame storefronts. A shopping center half-finished, covered in Holloway banners promising luxury mountain living. Even the gas station had been renovated recently, the Holloway logo stamped on a dedication plaque. This town belonged to Holloway. That much was obvious. Evelyn found the address for Thatcher and Brennan on a side street off Main. The building was old, original construction, probably with a wooden sign that needed repainting. Second floor above a hardware store. She parked on the street and told Claire to wait in the car doors locked. "I'll be quick," she promised. The stairs creaked. At the top, a frosted glass door read, "Thatcher and Brennan Associates, established 1952. Evelyn pushed it open into a small waiting room that smelled like old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. A receptionist looked up. Older woman reading glasses on a chain and smiled politely. "You must be Ms. Hartwell. Mr. Thatcher is expecting you." The inner office was cramped and cluttered with file boxes stacked against every wall. Edmund Thatcher sat behind a desk that looked older than he was, and he looked at least 70. Liver spots on his hands, thinning white hair, eyes that had seen too many property disputes and bitter divorces. "Ms. Hartwell." He stood offering his hand. His grip was dry and brief. "Thank you for coming." Please sit." Evelyn sat in a chair that might have been comfortable in 1975. Edmund opened a file folder. "The property transfer is straightforward. Warren Hartwell's will was very specific. Upon his death, ownership passes to you after a 50-year waiting period. That period expired last month. The cabin and surrounding 40 acres are now yours free and clear. No liens, no encumbrances." 40 acres. Yes, the original Hartwell property was significantly larger, 640 acres, a full section. But most of that was sold off over the years. What remains is the cabin site and immediate surroundings. Sold off or stolen. Evelyn kept her face neutral. Edmund slid papers across the desk. Deed transfer. Tax documents. Authorization to remove the government seal. The bureaucracy of inheritance, reduced to signatures and notary stamps. "Can I ask," Evelyn said carefully, "why the cabin was sealed?" The letter said since 1948. Edmund's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Wariness, maybe. "That was before my time. The seal was placed by county order. Technically, the property was deemed unsafe for habitation. For 75 years. The county can be cautious with such matters. And my grandfather, Clayton Hartwell. Do you know what happened to him?" Now, Edmund's face definitely closed. Professional distance sliding into place like a mask. "That was long before I practiced here. I believe there was an investigation at the time. The sheriff's department would have records." Sheriff Brennan's department. Edmund's hand paused over the papers, just for a second. Marshal Brennan retired in 1965. He passed away in 1980. The current sheriff is Linda Hayes, elected 2 years ago. If you have questions about historical cases, she'd be the one to ask. But the way he said it made clear he thought she shouldn't ask. Shouldn't dig into old cases. Shouldn't disturb settled history. "The Brennan in your firm's name," Evelyn said, "related to Marshall Brennan. My partner's grandfather, yes. Though Fletcher retired 15 years ago. I run the practice alone now. Fletcher Brennan. The grandson of the sheriff who'd closed Clayton's case. Working in the same town, the same practice, probably seeing the same families and handling the same property disputes for decades. Small towns. Everyone connected to everyone. And secrets that went back 75 years held in place by people who'd rather not disturb them." Edmund pushed the papers closer. "If you'll sign here, and here. Initial here." Evelyn signed. Her hand was steady. Years of signing rental applications and utility disconnection notices and promises to pay medical bills had given her lots of practice, signing things that changed her life. Edmund notarized stamped filed copies. The whole process took maybe 10 minutes. At the end of it, Evelyn Hartwell owned 40 acres of mountain property and a cabin that had been sealed since her grandfather disappeared. "The cabin is 12 miles east of town," Edmund said, sliding a hand-drawn map across the desk. "Old logging road. 4-wheel drive recommended. The seal authorization allows you to remove the lock and enter. I should warn you, 75 years is a long time. The structure may not be safe. I'll be careful. Edmund nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else. His mouth open-closed. Then, Ms. Hartwell, may I speak candidly, please? Pine Hollow is a small town. People talk. Word will get around very quickly that you're here, that you've claimed the Hartwell property. He paused. Holloway Development has significant interests in this area. If they approach you about selling, I'd recommend having legal representation before signing anything. Are you offering to represent me? No, Edmund said quickly. Too quickly. My practice is small. I handle wills and property transfers. Nothing adversarial. But there are other attorneys. Margot Blackwell has an office on Main Street. She's not affiliated with any of the local families. Not affiliated with Holloway or Brennan, he meant. An outsider. Someone who might actually help, instead of gently steering Evelyn toward whatever served the town's established interests. Thank you, Evelyn said. She stood. Edmund stood. They shook hands again, and this time he held on a moment longer. Be careful, he said quietly. Some history is better left alone. It was the same thing Warren had said. Be careful. But Warren had also said, don't back down. Evelyn walked back down the creaking stairs to where Claire waited in the car. She sat in the driver's seat and looked at the deed in her hands. Her name in official type. Evelyn Marie Hartwell, owner of 40 acres she'd never seen, and a cabin that had been locked shut since before her mother was born. Did you get it? Claire asked. I got it. Can we see it now? Evelyn looked at the hand-drawn map. 12 miles on old logging roads. It would be getting dark in a few hours. Going now meant they'd be out there as the sun set in a cabin that might not have electricity or running water 12 miles from town, with no cell service, and a car that might or might not start reliably. The smart thing would be to wait. Get a motel room tonight. Go in the morning in daylight prepared. But Evelyn looked at Claire's hopeful face and thought about another night in the car, another parking lot, another round of, is this better than the car? And made a decision that probably wasn't smart, but felt necessary. Yeah, she said. Let's go see it. The logging road was worse than Edmund's map suggested. What had once been gravel was now mostly dirt and rocks washed out in places where winter runoff had carved gullies across the path. The Ford Escape scraped bottom twice in the first mile, and Evelyn had to navigate around fallen branches that looked like they'd been there for years. The forest pressed in close on both sides. Old-growth Douglas fir, some of them thick enough that 3 people couldn't wrap their arms around the trunks. The canopy blocked most of the late afternoon light, creating a permanent twilight beneath the trees. Claire had stopped coughing and started staring out the window with wide eyes. It's kinda creepy, she said. It's just trees. A lot of trees. The road climbed steadily. Evelyn kept the Escape in second-gear engine whining. The gas gauge was below a quarter tank now. They'd need to fill up in town before heading back. Add that to the list of expenses she couldn't afford. At mile 8, the road forked. Edmund's map showed a left turn marked Hartwell Property Private Road. The sign that must have once stood there was long gone, but tire tracks showed someone had been this way recently. Within the last few months, maybe. Evelyn turned left onto a road that was more suggestion than reality. Grass grew down the center between the tire tracks. Branches scraped both sides of the car. This wasn't a logging road. This was someone's driveway, or had been 75 years ago when people still lived out here. 2 more miles of crawling forward and the trees opened into a clearing. There it was. The cabin sat in the exact center of the clearing, surrounded by grass that had grown wild but not overgrown, as if something about this place kept nature from fully reclaiming it. The structure was small, maybe 20 feet by 30, built from logs that had darkened with age but showed no obvious rot. The roof was shingled, sagging slightly in the middle but intact. Windows were boarded over with what looked like newer wood, probably installed when the seal was placed, and across the front door, a metal plate had been bolted into the frame. Official looking, county seal stamped into the metal. And beneath that, words cast in raised letters. Sealed by order, Cascade County, October 15th, 1948. Evelyn turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and complete. No traffic noise, no distant sounds of civilization. Just wind moving through the trees and the tick of the cooling engine. "Is this it?" Claire asked. "This is it." They got out. Evelyn's boots sank slightly into soft earth still damp from recent rain. The clearing felt bigger than it looked, as if the forest was keeping a respectful distance, or maybe a wary one. Claire walked toward the cabin, slowly taking in the boarded windows and sealed door. "It doesn't look scary." "No," Evelyn agreed. "It doesn't." It looked frozen, suspended, like a photograph instead of a real place, like time had stopped on October 15th, 1948, and everything since then had happened somewhere else. Evelyn approached the door. The metal seal was bolted on with 6 heavy screws, each one thick as her thumb. She pulled the authorization letter from her pocket and read it again, as if the words might have changed. They hadn't. She was legally permitted to remove this seal and enter the property. But standing here looking at metal that had been in place for 75 years, she hesitated. Warren's warning echoed in her mind. "They'll know when you show up." She looked around the clearing, saw nothing but trees and grass, and afternoon shadows. But that didn't mean no one was watching. In fact, if Holloway Development really had been monitoring this property for 75 years, they almost certainly had cameras, motion sensors, some way of knowing when the seal finally broke, which meant she probably had hours, maybe less, before someone showed up to see who'd claimed the Hartwell property. "Mom," Claire was standing back, uncertainty on her face. "It's okay," Evelyn said. "I'm just thinking." She pulled a multi-tool from her pocket, one of the few useful things she still owned, and selected the screwdriver head. The screws were old, but not rusted. Someone had maintained this seal over the decades, replacing bolts as needed, keeping the metal clean, keeping the cabin locked tight. The first screw resisted, then gave with a squeal of metal on wood. The second came easier. By the sixth, Evelyn's hands were shaking slightly, though whether from exertion or anticipation, she couldn't say. The seal came free in her hands, heavy, official. The kind of thing that represented governmental authority and legal order, and all the structures that were supposed to protect people, but sometimes just protected secrets. She set it carefully on the ground beside the door. Beneath where the seal had been, the door was remarkably preserved. Dark wood hand-fitted planks, a simple lever handle. Evelyn reached for it and her hand paused. This was it. The moment Warren had planned for 50 years. The moment Clayton had died for. The moment that might change everything or nothing. She pressed down on the lever. The door swung inward. A rush of air moved past her face. Not stale exactly, but old, undisturbed, carrying with it scents of wood smoke and dust, and something else. Something that made Evelyn think of the word preserved. The interior was dark, the boarded windows allowing only thin lines of light through gaps in the planks. But even in that dimness, she could see enough to understand what Warren had meant. Time stopped here. A table stood in the center of the room, and on it 2 coffee cups. Not overturned, not broken. Just sitting there as if someone had set them down mid-conversation and stepped away. A coat hung on a peg by the door, wool fabric somehow not moth-eaten, waiting for its owner to return. A calendar hung on one wall, and even from here Evelyn could see the date, October 14th, 1948. Claire had followed her inside. Her whisper was loud in the silence. "It's like a museum." "Yeah," Evelyn said. "Exactly like a museum." But museums were for things that were finished, dead. This felt suspended, waiting. She moved farther into the cabin, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. One main room serving as kitchen and living space. A door in the back that probably led to a bedroom. A stone fireplace along one wall, ashes still in the hearth from a fire burned 75 years ago. Bookshelves lined with volumes about farming and land management and legal codes. And there, separate from the others, a journal. Leather-bound, aged, dark. Sitting exactly where someone had left it in 1948. Evelyn reached for it, then paused. Her training as a marketing professional back when she'd had a profession included respect for documentation. Touch nothing without photographs. Preserve the scene before disturbing it. She pulled out her phone. No service as expected. But the camera still worked. She photographed everything. The table with its cups, the calendar, the coat, the fireplace, the bookshelves, the journal. Only then did she pick it up. The leather was soft under her fingers, worn smooth by hands that had held it often. She opened to the first page, and Clayton Hartwell's handwriting looked back at her. Strong, confident strokes in dark ink that had faded only slightly. The first entry was dated September 1st, 1948. Met again with Cornelius Holloway regarding timber rights. He insists the arrangement is temporary 5 years while he raises capital for full development. But I've read the contract thoroughly now. The language is intentionally deceptive. If I sign ownership transfers permanently regardless of what he claims verbally, I told him I need more time to review with counsel. He didn't like that. Evelyn flipped forward. More entries chronicling a growing conflict between Clayton and Holloway. Increasingly aggressive pressure to sign. Veiled threats. References to Sheriff Brennan being unreasonably interested in Clayton's property taxes and building permits. September 18th, 1948. Holloway brought his attorney today. Fellow named Brennan, the sheriff's brother, I believe. They offered $10,000 outright purchase, a fortune, they said. But I've had the land surveyed independently. With the railroad coming through and tourism expansion, this property will be worth 10 times that within a decade. They know it. They're counting on me being too simple to realize it. October 1st, 1948. Direct threat today. Holloway said accidents happen in these mountains, especially to stubborn men. I've hidden the original deeds in a safe place. If something happens to me, Warren will know where to look. October 12th, 1948. They came back with a new offer. $15,000 and a consulting position in their development company. I laughed in Holloway's face. This land has been in my family for 30 years. My son will inherit it someday and his children after him. Not these vultures. October 14th, 1948. The final entry. The handwriting was shakier here, written in haste. 6 o'clock. I hear vehicles coming up the road. Holloway and Brennan, certainly. They called earlier with their final offer. I refused. I've prepared everything. Documents are hidden in the fireplace, the loose stone third from bottom on the left side. The unsigned contract page 7 is in the mine shaft, in the lockbox Warren and I use for hunting supplies. He'll know where to look. If I don't survive tonight, whoever reads this, don't let them win. Don't let them take what they killed for. The land is legally mine. The transfer is void. Fight for it. It's getting dark now. I can see headlights through the trees. Multiple vehicles. More than just Holloway and Brennan. Tell Warren I love him. Tell my granddaughter. The entry ended. Mid-sentence. Ink trailing off as if the pen had been dropped. Evelyn's hands were shaking badly now. She set the journal carefully on the table and looked at Claire, who was examining the kitchen area with wide eyes. "Don't touch anything," Evelyn said. Her voice came out hoarse. "I'm not," Claire said. "Mom, there's food in here. In jars. Really old food." Evelyn moved to the kitchen. Sure enough, glass jars lined a shelf filled with preserved vegetables. The labels were handwritten, faded but readable. Tomatoes, green beans, pickles. Each one dated 1948, sealed tight contents. Somehow not spoiled despite 75 years. Because the cabin had been sealed. Airtight. Preserved not just by time but by intention. She turned to the fireplace. Stone construction blackened by decades of fires. She counted down from the top. Third stone from the bottom on the left side. It looked exactly like all the others, but when Evelyn pressed on it, it shifted slightly, loose. She worked her fingers around the edges and pulled. The stone came free more easily than she expected, revealing a cavity behind it about the size of a shoebox. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents. Evelyn lifted them out carefully. The oilcloth was intact, protecting its contents from moisture and time. She unwrapped it slowly. Land deed. Original dated 1920. Clayton Hartwell, owner of 640 acres in Cascade County, Oregon. Legal description. Survey map. All official, all stamped and notarized. Beneath that, a contract. Timber rights transfer agreement between Clayton Hartwell and Holloway Development Corporation. Dated September 15th, 1948. Most of it was standard legal language about rights and considerations and terms. But as Evelyn paged through, she saw what Clayton had meant. Pages 1 through 6 looked legitimate. Reasonable terms for a 5-year timber rights lease. But page 7 was missing. And at the bottom of page 6, a note in Clayton's handwriting. Page 7 contains perpetuity clause. Signing this means permanent transfer of all rights. Contract is void without my signature. And the signature line on page 6 was blank. Clayton had never signed, which meant legally no transfer had ever occurred. Everything Holloway Development had built in the 75 years since, all of it sitting on land they'd obtained through fraud and murder. Evelyn sat down hard on one of the chairs at the table. The wood creaked but held. "Mom?" Claire was beside her, concerned. "You okay?" "Yeah," Evelyn managed. "Yeah, I'm okay." But she wasn't. Because she was holding proof of one of the biggest corporate frauds in Oregon history. Proof that Clayton had been right. Proof that Warren had been right. Proof that her family had been murdered and robbed and erased from history to build an empire. And somewhere out there, the people who'd built that empire, or their descendants, were almost certainly watching. The light through the gaps in the boarded windows was fading fast. It would be full dark soon, and they were 12 miles from town, on roads that were barely passable in daylight. "We need to go," Evelyn said. "But we just got here." "I know. But we can't stay. Not tonight. We'll come back tomorrow." "With what?" "We don't have flashlights or sleeping bags or—" "I know," Evelyn said again. "That's why we're leaving." She wrapped the documents back in the oilcloth and tucked them into her jacket. The journal went into her other pocket. She photographed the empty hiding place in the fireplace, then tried to replace the stone, but it wouldn't sit quite right. Anyone looking would be able to tell it had been disturbed. They'd know she'd found something. Evelyn stepped back outside. The clearing was darker now, shadows stretching long from the trees. The Ford Escape looked small and vulnerable in the growing dusk. She pulled the door shut behind them and stood there with the metal seal in her hands, looking at the cabin that had kept its secrets for 75 years. "Mom, look." Claire was pointing toward the tree line on the far side of the clearing. For a moment, Evelyn saw nothing. Then movement, not an animal, too deliberate, too vertical. A person standing just inside the shadows where the forest began, watching them. Evelyn's heart kicked into overdrive. She grabbed Claire's hand and moved toward the car, not running, don't run, don't show fear, but walking with purpose. "Get in the car," she said quietly. "Lock the doors." But now Claire got in. Evelyn rounded to the driver's side, her eyes never leaving the tree line. The figure hadn't moved, just standing there, watching. She got in, locked the doors, started the engine. It caught on the second try, and she'd never been more grateful for that old Ford's reliability. As she turned the car around in the clearing, her headlights swept across the trees where the figure had been standing. Empty. No one there. But as she drove back down the overgrown driveway, she could feel eyes on the back of her neck. Could feel the weight of attention, of interest. "They'll know when you show up," Warren had said. Evelyn pressed harder on the gas, the Escape bouncing over ruts and rocks, branches scraping the sides, getting distance between them and that clearing, between them and whoever had been watching. It wasn't until they reached the main logging road that her hands stopped shaking enough to grip the wheel properly. Beside her, Claire was silent, too silent. "You saw someone," Claire said finally. "Maybe," Evelyn said. "Could have been shadows. Mom. Could have been a hunter or someone out hiking. In the dark, 12 miles from town." Evelyn didn't answer, because Claire was right. No one had any legitimate reason to be out there at dusk, standing in the trees watching a sealed cabin. Unless they'd been waiting. Unless they'd known someone would finally come to claim the property. Unless they'd been watching for 75 years. And now the watch had paid off. The drive back to Pine Hollow took 40 minutes of careful navigation. In full darkness, the Escape's headlights barely adequate for the winding roads. When they finally reached town, it was past 7, and most businesses were closed. Evelyn found a motel called the Pine Rest Inn at the edge of town. $45 a night. She paid cash for one night and got a key to room 12, ground floor facing the parking lot. The room smelled like cigarettes and bleach, but it had 2 beds and a bathroom and heat that actually worked. Claire went straight to the shower, and Evelyn could hear her coughing through the thin walls. She needed to get Claire medicine, needed to figure out their next move, needed to decide whether to pursue this insanity or sell everything and run. But first, she needed to look at what she'd found. Evelyn spread the documents out on the bed. Land deed. Contract pages 1 through 6. Clayton's journal. She photographed everything with her phone, created a folder, uploaded it to 3 different cloud storage accounts. If something happened to the originals, at least there would be copies. Then she really looked at what she had. The land deed was straightforward. 640 acres legal description, matching the survey map Clayton had referenced in his journal. If this deed was valid, and it looked official enough, then Clayton had owned a full square mile of land in what was now prime development territory. And if the contract was never signed, that land had never legally transferred to Holloway Development, which meant 75 years of construction sales and development had happened on land Holloway didn't actually own, which meant, if she could prove it, she owned not just the 40 acres around the cabin, but potentially hundreds of acres of extremely valuable real estate that currently had condos and shopping centers built on it. The implications made her head spin. Claire came out of the shower wrapped in a towel, still coughing. Evelyn got her into pajamas and gave her the last dose of children's ibuprofen from a bottle she'd been rationing for weeks. "Are we in trouble?" Claire asked. "What makes you think that you look scared?" Evelyn sat on the edge of Claire's bed. Her daughter was too perceptive, too smart, too aware that her mother had no idea what she was doing. "I found some documents today," Evelyn said carefully, "about the land, about what happened to my grandfather. It's complicated, but it might mean we have rights to property that other people think belongs to them. The Holloway people. Yeah, the Holloway people. Are they bad people?" Evelyn thought about Clayton's journal, about Warren's warning, about a figure standing in the shadows watching them. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm going to find out." She tucked Claire in, turned off the light, and sat in the chair by the window. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the parking lot, the Ford Escape, and beyond that, Pine Hollow's main street, dark except for streetlights and the occasional passing car. Somewhere in this town was Margot Blackwell, the attorney Edmund Thatcher had mentioned. Someone not affiliated with the local families. Someone who might actually help. And somewhere else in this town, or maybe right outside, maybe watching this motel, were people who'd spent 75 years keeping Clayton's murder quiet, who'd killed Warren's wife to keep him silent, who'd built an empire on stolen land and fraud and violence. People who would not be happy to learn that a homeless woman with $47 and a dying car had just uncovered proof that could unravel everything they'd built. Evelyn's phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The message was brief. "We know you're here. We know what you found. We'd like to talk. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Holloway Development Offices, Main Street. Come alone." No signature, no threats. Just a polite invitation that somehow felt more menacing than any direct threat could have been. They'd found her already. Less than 6 hours after she'd broken the seal, they'd tracked her down. Found her phone number. Sent a message that made clear they knew exactly what she'd discovered. Evelyn looked at the documents spread on the bed, at her daughter sleeping fitfully, at the choice that wasn't really a choice because she'd come too far to turn back now. She typed a reply, "I'll be there." The response came immediately. Smart decision. Evelyn deleted both messages, turned off her phone, and sat in the dark watching the parking lot until exhaustion finally pulled her under sometime after midnight. Outside, Pine Hollow slept peacefully, keeping its secrets the way small towns do. Quiet, patient, waiting to see what the morning would bring. Part 2. The investigation. Evelyn woke at 5:30 to the sound of Claire coughing. The motel room was dark except for the red glow of the digital clock and the thin line of streetlight leaking through the curtains. She'd slept 3 hours, maybe 4, fully clothed on top of the covers with her hand on her phone. The documents were still spread across the other bed, where she'd left them. And for a moment in the pre-dawn dimness, she wondered if she'd dreamed the whole thing. The cabin, the journal, the figure in the shadows, the text message. Then Claire coughed again, that deep, rattling sound that meant her chest was getting worse, and Evelyn remembered this was real. All of it. She got up quietly and felt Claire's forehead, definitely warmer than last night. They needed a pharmacy. They needed antibiotics. They needed things that cost money Evelyn didn't have. But first, she needed a lawyer. The shower ran lukewarm at best, but it was still better than Planet Fitness. Evelyn stood under the weak stream and tried to organize her thoughts into something resembling a plan. The meeting with Holloway was at 10. That gave her 4 hours to find Margot Blackwell, show her the documents, and figure out if she had any kind of legal standing or if this was all just the desperate fantasy of a homeless woman grasping at inheritance that would evaporate under actual scrutiny. She dressed in the cleanest clothes she had, jeans that were only slightly wrinkled, a sweater that didn't smell like the inside of a car, put on the silver necklace her mother had given her years ago, the only piece of jewelry she hadn't sold. Tried to look like someone who owned 40 acres of mountain property, and not like someone who'd been sleeping in a Ford Escape for 4 months. Claire woke up as Evelyn was gathering the documents back into her jacket pockets. "Where are we going?" Her voice was hoarse. "We're going to find a lawyer. Someone who can help us." "Help us with what?" How did you explain to an 11-year-old that her great-grandfather had been murdered? That her mother had stumbled onto evidence of a 75-year-old conspiracy? That everything in their lives might be about to change in ways neither of them could predict? "Help us figure out what we own," Evelyn said, "and what we should do about it." She got Claire dressed and medicated with the last of the ibuprofen. They'd find a pharmacy after the lawyer, one crisis at a time. The Pine Rest Inn had complimentary coffee in the office, burnt and weak but free. Evelyn filled a styrofoam cup and added 3 sugars and 2 creamers because calories were calories and breakfast was uncertain. Claire got hot chocolate from a powder mix that was probably 50% sugar. "Can we get pancakes?" Claire asked. Evelyn looked at the $43 remaining in her wallet. The motel had cost $45. Gas would be another $20 to get back to Portland. That left her with maybe enough for antibiotics if they could find a pharmacy that would give her the generic version, and if Claire's prescription from 6 months ago could be refilled without an appointment. "After we see the lawyer," Evelyn said, which might mean never. But Claire didn't need to know that yet. Main Street was quiet at 7 in the morning. A few trucks parked outside the diner. The hardware store still closed. And there, between a vacant storefront and a real estate office, a small sign, Margot Blackwell, attorney at law, 2nd floor. The door was locked, but lights were on upstairs. Evelyn could see movement through the window. Someone was already there. She knocked. A minute later, footsteps on stairs. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s. Dark hair pulled back, coffee mug in hand, wearing running clothes and looking surprised to have visitors before 8 a.m. "We're not open yet," she said. Not unkindly, but firmly. "Are you Margot Blackwell?" "Yes." "Edmund Thatcher said you might be able to help me. My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I inherited property here, and I think I'm about to need a lawyer very badly." Margot's expression shifted from polite dismissal to actual interest. "Hartwell, the sealed cabin. Word travels fast. Small town. And Edmund called me last night. Said you'd been by. Said I should expect you." Margot stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come on up. But fair warning, I haven't had enough coffee yet to be particularly brilliant." The office was small but organized. Law books lined one wall. A desk with 2 monitors. Filing cabinets that looked recently updated. Everything clean and professional in a way that suggested Margot took her practice seriously, even if Pine Hollow was a small pond. Margot gestured them to chairs and refilled her coffee. "Want some? I've also got juice boxes for the kid." "Claire," Evelyn said. "Her name is Claire." "Claire, you like apple or fruit punch?" "Apple," Claire said quietly. Margot pulled a juice box from a small refrigerator and handed it over, then sat behind her desk. "So, the Hartwell property. Edmund said your brother left it to you in trust. 50-year waiting period. That's unusual." "Everything about this is unusual," Evelyn said. She pulled out the documents and spread them on Margot's desk. Land deed, contract pages, Clayton's journal. Laid it all out like evidence at trial, which maybe it would be someday. Margot picked up the land deed first, examined it closely, then set it down and reached for the contract pages. Her expression stayed neutral professional, but Evelyn saw her eyes widen slightly when she got to the missing page 7 notation. "Where's the rest of this contract?" Margot asked. "My grandfather hid it. Somewhere called Silver Creek Mine. He wrote about it in his journal." Margot opened the journal, read a few entries, then a few more. When she looked up, her professional neutrality had cracked into something more human. Concern, maybe, or recognition of just how deep this went. "Your grandfather thought Holloway was trying to defraud him." "My grandfather was murdered," Evelyn said. "October 14th, 1948. The same night he made his last journal entry. The same night he hid the contract page that would have transferred his land permanently to Cornelius Holloway. You can't know he was murdered. The official record says he disappeared. My brother knew. Warren. He was there, well, not there when it happened, but he knew what Holloway did. He told me before he died." "When did your brother die?" 1974. "Officially." Margot's eyebrows went up. "Officially." Evelyn pulled out her phone, found the video file she'd copied from the USB drive, and handed it across the desk. "He actually died in 2022, at 97 years old." But for 48 years, he let everyone think he died in a car accident because the same people who killed my grandfather tried to kill him and succeeded in killing his wife. Margot watched the video, all of it. Her coffee went cold in her hand. When it finished, she set the phone down very carefully. "Jesus Christ," she said quietly. "Yeah, you understand what you're sitting on here. If even half of this is true, if the land deed is legitimate and the transfer never happened, you're talking about potentially hundreds of acres that Holloway Development has been treating as their own for 75 years. I know. They've built on that land, sold properties, developed entire neighborhoods. If the original ownership is in dispute, every single one of those transactions could be legally questionable. I know. They will fight this with everything they have. Every lawyer, every dollar, every connection they've built over 3 generations. They will bury you in motions and appeals and discovery requests. They will make your life hell." Evelyn leaned forward. "Can they win?" Margot was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I don't know. It depends on what we can prove. But the fact that they've been paying property taxes on this land for 75 years, that creates an adverse possession claim. They could argue they've maintained the property long enough to claim legal ownership regardless of the original deed, even if that original deed was obtained through murder and fraud. Adverse possession doesn't care how the occupation started, just that it was continuous, open, and under claim of right." Margot paused. "But if we can prove the fraud, if we can prove Clayton never signed that contract, if we can show Holloway knew the transfer was invalid, that changes things. Fraud vitiates everything. They can't claim adverse possession on property they knew they didn't have legitimate rights to. So we need page 7 of the contract. We need page 7. We need proof of fraud. And ideally, we need evidence that Holloway knew about it, that they actively covered it up. My brother's video is hearsay. Compelling hearsay, but not admissible in court without corroboration." Margot stood up, started pacing. "What we need is documentation, paper trails, records showing Holloway knew the transfer was incomplete but proceeded anyway. Records of the original investigation into your grandfather's disappearance, showing it was inadequate or biased. Sheriff Brennan conducted that investigation. Marshal Brennan, I know. He's a local legend. Served for 35 years. Most people remember him as fair and honest. Most people didn't have their grandfather murdered." Margot stopped pacing. "You keep saying murdered, but the official record says Clayton Hartwell disappeared. Presumed dead after falling into Eagle's Gorge. No body was ever found." "Because they hid it," Evelyn said. "They killed him and hid the body and paid off the sheriff to call it an accident." "Can you prove any of that?" Evelyn opened Clayton's journal to the final entry and pushed it across the desk. "He wrote this the night he died, hours before they came. He knew they were coming. He knew what they wanted. And he hid the evidence so that someday someone could prove what they did." Margot read the entry twice. When she looked up, her expression had changed again. Less lawyer, more human being confronting something ugly. All right, she said. Let's say I believe you. Let's say everything in this journal is true. What do you want to do about it? I want to finish what my grandfather started. I want to prove Holloway stole our land. I want justice. Justice is a big word. Do you want the property back? Do you want financial compensation? Do you want criminal prosecution for a 75-year-old murder that might be impossible to prove? Evelyn thought about the Ford escape, about 4 months of homelessness, about Claire coughing in the next room while Evelyn tried to figure out how to afford antibiotics, about a future that looked like more parking lots and more shelters and more slow grinding away of everything that made them human. I want what's mine, she said. I want the land that should have been my inheritance. That should have been my mother's inheritance. That Clayton died protecting. I want Holloway to pay for what they took. That's gonna be expensive. Legal fees for something like this, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands if it goes to trial. I have $43. Margot smiled slightly. I work on contingency for cases like this. 30% if we win. Nothing if we lose. But you need to understand the risk. We might spend months on this and get nothing. Holloway might offer you a settlement just to make you go away, $50,000, $100,000, and if you turn that down to fight for everything, you could end up with nothing at all. What do you think we could win if we prove the land is yours? Depending on how much of the original 640 acres we can establish clear title to. Margot pulled up a map on her computer, started tracing property lines. Conservative estimate you'd own at least 200 acres of prime development land, currently valued at probably $30 to $40 million. And that's just the land value. If we can prove Holloway developed it knowing the title was questionable, you'd have claims for damages, unjust enrichment fraud. We could be looking at a $100 million case. The number was so large it didn't feel real. Evelyn had been counting in dollars for so long that millions felt like monopoly money. And if we lose, you go back to Portland with nothing. Same as you came here. Not quite the same. Because now Holloway knew she existed. Knew she had the documents. Knew she could cause problems. The text message last night had made that clear. They want to meet, Evelyn said. This morning. 10 a.m. at their offices. Margot's expression sharpened. They contacted you already. Text message, last night. Said they know I'm here. Know what I found, want to talk. Did you agree? I said I'd be there. Then you're not going alone, Margot said. Give me an hour to shower and change. We'll go together. And we don't sign anything, we don't agree to anything, we just listen to what they have to say. Understood. Evelyn nodded. Margot stood. There's a pharmacy 2 blocks down. Get your daughter whatever she needs. Put it on this. She handed Evelyn a credit card. Business expense. I'll need her healthy if this is gonna work. I can't. You can. Consider it an advance on your settlement. Now go. Meet me back here at 9:30. Evelyn took the card, feeling something unfamiliar and almost forgotten rise in her chest. Hope, maybe. or just the relief of not being entirely alone anymore. The pharmacy was small but well stocked. The pharmacist looked at Claire's cough, listened to her chest, and agreed that antibiotics were probably necessary. Called in a prescription to Claire's old pediatrician in Portland, got approval for amoxicillin, filled it in 15 minutes. $32 on Margot's card. Plus another $8 for cough syrup and a thermometer and a pack of cough drops. Your mom's taking care of you, the pharmacist said to Claire while ringing it up. Claire looked at Evelyn. She always does. They went next door to the diner and got pancakes because Claire had asked and because Evelyn couldn't remember the last time she'd been able to say yes to something her daughter wanted. $12 for 2 stacks with eggs and bacon. Coffee refills that the waitress kept coming without being asked. The diner was filling up with morning regulars. Men in Carhartt jackets and work boots talking about timber prices and weather, and the new development going up on the north side of town. Holloway development, naturally. Always Holloway. Evelyn listened to them talk, these men who'd probably lived in Pine Hollow their whole lives, who probably worked for Holloway or sold to Holloway or rented from Holloway, whose entire economy revolved around company built on land stolen from her grandfather. If she won this case, if she proved Holloway's ownership was fraudulent, what happened to these men, to their jobs, to this town that had grown comfortable living on stolen ground? She pushed the thought away. That wasn't her problem. Her problem was surviving, giving Claire a future, honoring the people who died trying to protect what was rightfully theirs. They finished breakfast and walked back to Margot's office. It was 9:15. Claire's cough was already sounding better, maybe psychosomatic. Maybe the ibuprofen was working, maybe just the relief of having medicine and food and a plan. Margot was waiting at her desk now, dressed in a sharp suit, hair styled, looking every inch the professional attorney. She had papers spread in front of her, printouts of property records, tax documents, development permits. "I've been doing research," she said. "The Holloway empire is bigger than I realized. But it's also more fragile. They've leveraged everything, taken out loans against properties, used those properties as collateral for more loans, built a whole house of cards, balanced on the assumption that they own what they say they own. And if they don't, then the cards fall." Margot gathered the papers into a folder. "Which means they will fight very, very hard to prevent that from happening. Are you ready for this?" Evelyn thought about Warren holding on for 50 years, planning everything, dying alone at 97, with nothing but the hope that someday someone would finish what he started. "I'm ready," she said. Holloway Development Corporation occupied the largest building on Main Street, 3 stories of modern glass and steel that looked like it had been airlifted from Portland and dropped into Pine Hollow's timber town architecture. The lobby was all polished concrete and reclaimed wood, carefully designed to look both industrial and expensive. A receptionist looked up as they entered, young, professionally dressed, with a smile that was friendly, until she saw Margot, then became carefully neutral. "Ms. Blackwell, Ms. Hartwell, Mr. Brennan is expecting you. 3rd floor conference room A." They took the elevator in silence. The doors opened onto a hallway lined with photos development projects, ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings. Cornelius Holloway in the 1940s standing in front of timber operations. His son in the 1970s breaking ground on the first shopping center. Graham Holloway cutting the ribbon on a luxury condo development. 3 generations building an empire on stolen land. Conference room, A had windows overlooking Main Street and a table that could seat 20. Currently, it seated 3 people. Graham Holloway sat at the head of the table. 59 years old according to the research Evelyn had done, but looking older. Weary. The kind of weariness that came from running an empire that was larger than one person could comfortably manage. Beside him sat a man in an expensive suit, Garrison Locke, according to the nameplate in front of him. General Counsel. Late 50s, sharp eyes, the kind of lawyer who charged $800 an hour and earned every penny. And across from them, Everett Brennan, the man who'd sent the text message, grandson of Sheriff Marshall Brennan. Currently serving as head of security and investigations for Holloway Development. He smiled when Evelyn and Margot entered. It didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Hartwell, thank you for coming. Please sit. They sat. Margot placed her folder on the table but didn't open it. Graham Holloway spoke first. His voice was quieter than Evelyn expected. Less corporate executive, more exhausted businessman. Ms. Hartwell, I understand you've inherited the old Hartwell cabin, the one that's been sealed since 1948. That must have been quite a surprise. It was, Evelyn said. I'm sure you have questions about the property, about its history. We'd like to help answer those questions, and we'd like to discuss a business proposition that I think will benefit everyone. Garrison Locke slid a folder across the table. We've prepared an offer to purchase the cabin and surrounding 40 acres. We think you'll find the terms generous. Evelyn didn't touch the folder. What's the offer? $75,000, cash. We'll handle all closing costs and legal fees. You walk away with a check within 30 days. It was more money than Evelyn had seen in years. More than enough to get an apartment, get Claire into a good school, start over somewhere new, put the last 4 months behind them. It was also insultingly low for 40 acres of development land. No, Evelyn said. Graham's expression didn't change, but Garrison's did. He leaned forward slightly. Perhaps you didn't hear correctly. 75,000, I heard. The answer is no. Ms. Hartwell, I don't think you understand the situation. That cabin has been abandoned for 75 years. The land around it is undeveloped, landlocked, accessible only by rough logging roads. Its value is purely speculative. Then why do you want it? Garrison smiled. We like to consolidate holdings in areas where we operate. Clean up property lines. It's good business practice. For $75,000, which is quite generous for property that generates no income and requires significant maintenance. Margot spoke for the first time. My client isn't interested in selling, but she is interested in discussing the history of how Holloway Development came to operate on land that was originally deeded to Clayton Hartwell. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Garrison's smile disappeared. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Ms. Blackwell." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Clayton Hartwell owned 640 acres in this area. There's no record of him ever legally transferring that property to Holloway Development. Yet Holloway has been operating on that land since 1948. "There was a contract," Garrison said. "Was there? We'd love to see it." Property records from that era are notoriously incomplete. But Holloway has maintained and paid taxes on this land for 75 years. That establishes clear adverse possession. Not if the possession was based on fraud. Now Graham held up a hand. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Ms. Blackwell, Ms. Hartwell, we're all reasonable people. There's no need for accusations or legal threats. We're here to find a solution that works for everyone." "Then show us the contract," Margot said. "The complete signed contract transferring property from Clayton Hartwell to Cornelius Holloway." Silence. Everett Brennan had been quiet until now. He spoke quietly, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "Ms. Hartwell, may I speak candidly? Please. You inherited a cabin. 40 acres of rough land, that's all. Whatever your brother may have told you, whatever documents you think you found, they don't change the reality of the situation. Holloway Development is the largest employer in this county. We provide jobs for over 2,000 people. We've built schools, funded hospitals, created the infrastructure that makes this town viable. On land you stole, on land we've legally possessed for 3/4 of a century. Land we've improved, land we've built on, land that was worthless timber country when my grandfather started this company, and is now worth hundreds of millions of dollars because of the work we've done. Your grandfather," Evelyn looked at the nameplate again. "Brennan. Marshall Brennan was your grandfather." "He was. He served this community honorably for 35 years. And yes, he was the investigating officer when Clayton Hartwell disappeared. He followed every lead, did everything by the book. The man fell into the gorge. It was a tragedy. But it wasn't murder, no matter what conspiracy theories your family has constructed." Evelyn felt anger rising in her chest. "My grandfather didn't fall. He was murdered by Cornelius Holloway. And your grandfather covered it up." "That's a serious accusation," Garrison said sharply. "One you absolutely cannot prove, and one that borders on defamation." "Can't I?" Evelyn pulled Clayton's journal from her jacket and set it on the table. "My grandfather wrote about it, about Holloway's threats, about your grandfather's intimidation, about how they were coming for him the night he died." Garrison reached for the journal. Margot's hand snapped out, covering it. "That's my client's property. You don't touch it without her permission. It's also potentially fabricated evidence. Then let's talk about the land deed. Original dated 1920. Shall I get that verified by a forensic document examiner? Or would you prefer we skip that step and move directly to filing a quiet title action?" Graham Holloway had been watching this exchange with growing concern. Now he spoke, and his voice carried weight that commanded attention. "Everyone, please, let's take a breath." He looked directly at Evelyn. "Ms. Hartwell, I understand you've been through difficult times. I understand this inheritance feels like an opportunity. And I understand that you have questions about your grandfather's death. Those are all legitimate concerns." He paused. "But you need to understand something. If you pursue this, if you make public accusations of fraud and murder, if you try to challenge our property holdings, if you drag this company through litigation, you won't win. We have resources you can't imagine. Legal teams that specialize in exactly these kinds of disputes. We will fight every motion, appeal every ruling, drag this out for years. And at the end of it, you'll have spent whatever money you have wasted years of your life. And you'll still lose because the law is on our side." "Is it?" Evelyn asked. "Adverse possession is well established. We've met every requirement. Open, continuous, exclusive possession under claim of right for the statutory period. No court in Oregon will overturn 75 years of established property rights based on the journal entries of a dead man and the conspiracy theories of his family." "What about page 7 of the contract?" Evelyn asked. Graham's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise or recognition. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The perpetuity clause. The page that would have transferred ownership permanently instead of the 5-year timber rights lease Cornelius Holloway claimed he was offering. The page my grandfather refused to sign. The page he hid because he knew what you were trying to do." "There is no missing page," Garrison said. "The contract was fully executed." "Then show it to us," Margot said. "Right now. Produce the complete signed contract." Garrison's jaw tightened. "We're not required to produce documents for your inspection without proper discovery procedures. Which means you don't have it. Which means we don't show our cards to opposing counsel without going through proper channels." Everett Brennan leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Hartwell, let me be very clear about something. This town is remote. These mountains are dangerous. Accidents happen out here all the time. People get lost. Cars go off roads. Things that seem safe turn out not to be." Margot stiffened. "Was that a threat?" "Of course not. Just stating facts. Ms. Hartwell has a young daughter. I'd hate for anything to happen that might put that child at risk." The room went very quiet. Evelyn felt rage settle into something cold and focused. This man, grandson of the sheriff who'd covered up her grandfather's murder, was threatening her daughter. Sitting in a corporate conference room, smiling politely and threatening an 11-year-old girl. She stood up. "We're done here," she said. "Ms. Blackwell, I'd like to retain you to file whatever legal actions are necessary to establish my ownership of the land that was stolen from my grandfather. And I'd like you to contact the FBI regarding a 75-year-old murder that was covered up by local law enforcement." Graham stood as well. "Ms. Hartwell, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're prepared to increase our offer. 100,000. 150. Name a reasonable price, and let's end this amicably. The reasonable price, Evelyn said, is everything you stole, plus interest, plus damages for 75 years of fraud, plus criminal prosecution for everyone involved in my grandfather's murder. Your grandfather wasn't murdered, Everett said. Then where's his body? Silence. If he fell in the gorge like your grandfather claimed, there should be a body. There should be remains. There should be some kind of physical evidence. But there isn't, is there? Because he didn't fall. He was killed. And someone hid the evidence. She picked up Clayton's journal and walked to the door. Margot followed. Behind them, Garrison's voice was sharp. You're making a mistake. A serious mistake. Evelyn turned back. My grandfather made a mistake 75 years ago. He trusted that the law would protect him. That doing the right thing would be enough. He was wrong, and it got him killed. She looked at each of them in turn. Graham with his exhausted eyes, Garrison with his expensive suit, Everett with his grandfather's legacy of corruption. But I'm not my grandfather, she said. I've already lost everything. I've got nothing left to lose. Which means I'm a lot more dangerous than he was. She walked out. The elevator ride down was silent. Margot said nothing until they were back on Main Street, out of the building, standing in the November sunlight. That felt warmer than it should. That went well, Margot said dryly. They threatened Claire. I heard. And that was stupid of them. Gives us leverage. Proves they're worried. They offered $150,000. Which means they think your claim is worth 10 times that. Probably more. Margot started walking back toward her office. They're scared. And scared people make mistakes. They also said they'd bury us in legal fees. They will. Or they'll try. But we have one advantage they don't. What's that? The truth. If we can prove it, prove. They reached Margot's building. Claire was sitting on the steps, reading a book from the library down the street. She looked up when they approached. How'd it go? She asked. We made some people very nervous, Evelyn said. Which is good. Upstairs, Margot pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Here's what we need to do. First, we file a quiet title action, establishing your ownership of the original 640 acres. That puts everything on the record and forces Holloway to respond. Second, we submit a records request to the county for all documents related to Clayton's disappearance, police reports, autopsy findings, if any investigation notes. Third, we find page 7 of that contract. It's in a mine shaft somewhere, according to my grandfather's journal. Silver Creek Mine, I know it. Abandoned since the 30s. Dangerous as hell. Partially collapsed. Margot looked up. You're not going alone. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because we're going to need someone who knows mines. Someone who can navigate safely. Someone we can trust. Do you know anyone like that? Margot smiled slightly. I might. There's a man who lives about 5 miles outside town, Roscoe Thorne, 74 years old. Worked timber and mines his whole life, and he was friends with your grandfather. Evelyn's heart jumped. He knew Clayton. They served in World War II together. Came back to Pine Hollow around the same time. Bought adjacent properties. Your grandfather's land was north, Roscoe's was south. They were close from what I understand. Does he know what happened? If he does, he's never said. But Roscoe's not fond of Holloway. Sold his timber rights to them in the 60s and always felt he got cheated. If anyone in this town would help you, it's him. Can we see him today? Margot checked her watch. It's 11:30. Let me call. She picked up the phone dialed from memory. The conversation was brief. When she hung up, she was nodding. He'll see us. Says he's been waiting 75 years for a Hartwell to come back and ask questions. I think you just made his day. Roscoe Thorne lived in a single-wide trailer surrounded by equipment that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. Backhoes and tractors slowly being reclaimed by blackberry bushes. Stacks of timber aging into decay. An American flag on a pole that had faded to near white in the mountain sun. But the trailer itself was immaculate. Fresh paint, clean windows, a small garden with winter vegetables growing in neat rows. Roscoe came out as they pulled up. He was tall and lean, bent slightly by age, but still carrying himself like a man who'd worked hard his whole life and been proud of it. His eyes were sharp and blue, and when he saw Evelyn, something in his expression shifted. "Lord," he said quietly, "you look just like him. You knew my grandfather. Clayton was my best friend for 30 years. Come inside. I'll make coffee." The trailer interior was spare but comfortable. Photos on every wall. Men in military uniforms, timber operations, families that had grown and aged over decades. And there, in a place of honor above the small fireplace, a photo of two young men in Army uniforms. Clayton Hartwell and Roscoe Thorne, 1943. Roscoe made coffee in silence, his hands steady despite his age. When he finally sat down across from them, he looked at Evelyn for a long moment. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said. "Didn't know if it'd be in my lifetime, but I knew someone would come asking questions." "What happened to him?" Evelyn asked. "To Clayton." Roscoe's hands tightened around his coffee mug. "He was murdered. October 14th, 1948, by Cornelius Holloway and Marshall Brennan, and at least 4 other men whose names I never learned." The certainty in his voice was absolute. This wasn't speculation or theory. This was witness testimony. "You saw it?" Margot asked. "No, but I heard it. Clayton called me that afternoon. Said Holloway was coming. Said he needed help. I grabbed my rifle and headed to his cabin. But I was 30 minutes away and they got there first." Roscoe's eyes went distant, seeing something 75 years in the past. "I heard the gunshots when I was still half a mile out. 2 shots. Then shouting, then nothing. I ran the rest of the way. Found the cabin door open. Blood on the porch. Clayton's rifle on the ground, but no Clayton. What did you do? I went inside. Place was torn apart. They'd been searching for something. I was about to start tracking them when Sheriff Brennan showed up with 4 deputies. Told me to get off the property. Said it was a crime scene. I told him Clayton was missing, that there'd been shots fired. He said he'd handle it, and if I didn't leave immediately, I'd be arrested for interfering with an investigation. Did you leave? I did. Went home. Came back the next morning with more man friends who knew Clayton, who'd served with him. We were going to organize a proper search, but Brennan met us at the property line. Said they'd completed their investigation. Said Clayton had been drinking and fell into Eagle's Gorge. Case closed. What about the blood? Brennan said Clayton must have cut himself on something before he fell. What about the gunshots? I asked. Brennan said there were no gunshots. Said I must have heard backfires from a truck. Said the cabin hadn't been disturbed. Said everything was exactly as it should be. Roscoe's jaw tightened. I tried to argue. Tried to get the state police involved. 2 nights later, 3 men jumped me outside the hardware store. Beat me bad enough I spent a week in the hospital. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. And the message was clear: shut up or die. So you shut up, Evelyn said quietly. I shut up. I was 24 years old. I had a wife and a baby on the way. And I knew that if I kept pushing, they'd kill me just like they killed Clayton. So I stayed quiet. Sold my timber rights to Holloway in '63. Because I needed the money and because refusing would have raised questions. Watched them build an empire on land they stole. And I hated myself for it every single day for 75 years. He looked at Evelyn directly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. Sorry I didn't find a way to get justice for your grandfather. Sorry I let them win. You survived, Evelyn said. That's what Clayton would have wanted. For you to live. Maybe. But I should have done more. Roscoe walked to a closet and pulled out a cardboard box. Warren came to see me in 1974, right before his accident. He knew what I knew. We talked about going public, about going to the FBI, about finally telling the truth. He set the box on the table. 2 weeks later, his wife was dead, and he disappeared. I got a letter from him months later. Said he was alive, but had to stay hidden. Said he'd made arrangements. Said someday someone from the family would come back, and when they did, I should give them this. Evelyn opened the box. Inside were photographs, documents, letters, and at the bottom a cassette tape with a label in Warren's handwriting. October 13th, 1948, Clayton Hartwell. Your grandfather recorded that the night before he died, Roscoe said. Wanted to leave evidence, something that couldn't be ignored or destroyed. I've kept it safe all these years, along with everything else Warren left. Margot picked up the cassette. Do you have a player? I do. Roscoe pulled out an old tape deck, the kind that hadn't been manufactured in 30 years. He inserted the cassette and pressed play. Static. Then Clayton Hartwell's voice strong and clear, despite 75 years of magnetic degradation. This is Clayton Hartwell, October 13th, 1948. If anyone is hearing this, I'm probably dead. And if I'm dead, it's because Cornelius Holloway and Sheriff Marshall Brennan murdered me. The voice was matter of fact, calm, like a man reading his own obituary before it was written. Holloway wants my land. 640 acres of prime timber and future development property. He's been pressuring me to sign a contract, says it's a 5-year timber rights lease. But I've read the fine print. Page 7 contains a perpetuity clause that transfers ownership permanently. I refuse to sign it. 3 days ago, Holloway came to my cabin with Brennan and threatened me. Said accidents happen to stubborn men. Said my son Warren might have an accident if I didn't cooperate. I told them to get off my property. Yesterday, Brennan called. Said this was my last chance. Sign or face consequences. I hung up on him. I've hidden the original land deed in the fireplace third stone from bottom left side. I've torn out page 7 of the contract and hidden it at Silver Creek Mine in the lockbox. Warren and I keep in chamber 3 for hunting supplies. Anyone who knows our family history will know where to look. If I die tonight, and I believe I will, don't let them win. Don't let them steal what I died protecting. The land is legally mine. The transfer is void without my signature. Fight for it. The tape went silent for a moment. Then Clayton's voice came back quieter now. Warren, if you're hearing this, I love you, son. I'm proud of you. Take care of your family. And don't try to get revenge. Just get justice. That's all I ask. Another pause. I hear vehicles coming up the road. Multiple engines. They're here. I have to. The recording ended abruptly. Just stopped mid-sentence as if Clayton had put down the microphone and picked up his rifle. The trailer was silent except for the soft hiss of the tape reaching its end. Evelyn found she was crying. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears running down her face, while her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, a man she barely remembered speaking across 3/4 of a century asking for justice. Roscoe turned off the player. That's evidence. Real evidence. Your grandfather's testimony recorded before he died. Combined with the journal and the documents you found, it's enough to reopen the investigation. After 75 years, Margot said, most physical evidence will be gone. Witnesses dead. Crime scene long contaminated. Not all the witnesses, Roscoe said. I'm still here. I heard the shots. I saw the blood. And I can testify that Brennan shut down the investigation without following proper procedures. They'll say you're biased, that you're a friend making accusations to help the family. Then we find page 7. We find the proof that Clayton refused to sign. We show that Holloway built everything on fraud, and we force them to admit what they did. Evelyn wiped her eyes. Where exactly is Silver Creek Mine? 2 miles north of your grandfather's cabin. I can take you there. But it's dangerous. Tunnels have been unstable for 80 years. Parts have collapsed. You go in there, you might not come out. Then we go prepared, Margot said. Helmets, lights, rope. We do it right. Roscoe looked at each of them. When? Tomorrow, Evelyn said. First thing, before Holloway figures out what we're planning. They already know we're planning something, Margot said. The question is whether they know about the mine. About page 7. Warren found it in 49, Roscoe said. Took it out, showed it to me. Proof that the contract was incomplete. We were going to take it to the state police, but Brennan must have found out somehow. Because that's when things got violent. That's when Warren's wife died. So Warren hid it again. Must have. He never told me where. Just said he'd made sure it would surface eventually. When it was safe. When someone from the family came looking. Evelyn thought about Warren's 50-year plan. The sealed cabin. The USB drive with the video. The documents hidden and waiting. Every piece of evidence carefully preserved and positioned for exactly this moment. Her brother had spent his entire life planning for a confrontation he'd never see. Making sure that someday someone would have everything they needed to finish what Clayton started. And now that someone was her. Tomorrow morning, she said, we go to the mine. We find page 7. And then we take everything to the FBI. Roscoe nodded. I'll meet you at the cabin. 6 a.m. Bring Claire. She shouldn't be alone if Holloway decides to make a move. They wouldn't. They threatened her today, Roscoe said flatly. Don't underestimate what desperate people will do. They left Roscoe's place as the sun was dropping toward the mountains. On the drive back to town, Evelyn's phone buzzed. Text message from the same unknown number as before. You made a mistake today. Last chance to take the deal. After tonight, the offer is withdrawn, and things get difficult. She showed it to Margot. That's witness intimidation, Margot said. Document it. Screenshot everything. We're building a case not just for fraud, but for ongoing criminal activity. They stopped at a sporting goods store and bought helmets, headlamps, rope, and climbing harnesses. $300 on Margot's card. Then to a hardware store for tools. Crowbars, hammers, bolt cutters in case the lockbox was sealed or chained. By the time they got back to the motel, it was dark. Evelyn paid for another night $45 she didn't have but couldn't avoid. Inside room 12, she spread everything out on the bed. Equipment for tomorrow. Documents from today. Evidence spanning 75 years. Claire was quiet through dinner McDonald's because it was cheap and fast. She'd been unusually subdued since the meeting at Holloway. Old enough to understand something serious was happening. Young enough to be frightened by it. Are we in danger? She asked as Evelyn tucked her into bed. Evelyn wanted to lie. Wanted to say everything was fine. They were safe. Nothing bad would happen. But Claire deserved better than comfortable lies. Maybe, she said. Some people are very unhappy that we're asking questions about the past. They might try to scare us, but we're being careful. And we have help now. Margot and Roscoe are on our side. What if they try to hurt us? Then we'll call the police. The real police, not the ones who were involved back then. And we'll make sure everyone knows what's happening. It's harder for people to do bad things when everyone's watching. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, did they really kill Great-Grandpa Clayton? Yes. And they tried to kill Uncle Warren? Yes. But we're still going to fight them? Yes. Why? Why not just take their money and leave? Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed. How did you explain to an 11-year-old about honor and justice and finishing what your family started? How did you make her understand that some things mattered more than safety? Because if we don't, she said finally, then they win. Then Clayton died for nothing. Warren lived in hiding for nothing. And the next time someone strong tries to take something from someone weak, they'll remember that they got away with it before. That murder works. That stealing works. That you just have to wait long enough and people forget. She smoothed Claire's hair back. We're not strong people, baby. We're broke and homeless and we've got no power at all. But we have the truth. And sometimes the truth is enough. Sometimes it has to be enough. Claire thought about that, then nodded. Okay, she said. Then we fight. Evelyn kissed her forehead and turned off the light. Sat in the chair by the window again, watching the parking lot. Watching for anyone who might be watching them. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. But this one wasn't a threat. It was a photo. The cabin. Their cabin. Clayton's cabin. Someone was there. Right now. In the dark. Taking pictures. And beneath the photo a message. We know where you'll be tomorrow. We'll be waiting. Evelyn's hands tightened on the phone. They knew about the mine. Knew she'd be going there. Which meant they'd either been listening somehow or they'd figured it out the same way she had. Following the same trail Clayton had left. Either way, tomorrow was going to be more complicated than she'd planned. She called Margot. They know, she said when Margot answered. About the mine, they'll be there. Then we bring more people. Roscoe. Maybe we call the sheriff the current sheriff, Linda Hayes. Make it official. And if Hayes is on Holloway's payroll like Brennan was. Margot had spent the afternoon researching Sheriff Linda Hayes, elected 2 years ago on a reform platform. No family connections to Brennan or Holloway. Clean record with state police. References checked out. If anyone in Pine Hollow could be trusted, it was her. I vetted her, Margot said. Hayes is clean. No ties to the old families. We can trust her. Margot, they're threatening us. They're watching us. This is getting dangerous. I know. Which means we're close. They wouldn't be this aggressive if they thought we were chasing ghosts. Margot paused. You can still walk away. Take the 150,000. Disappear. They'll let you if you sign the right paperwork. Evelyn looked at Claire sleeping in the other bed. Thought about Warren at 97 alone in hospice, holding on long enough to leave a message. thought about Clayton's voice on that tape, calm and certain even though he knew he was gonna die. "No," she said. "We finished this." "Okay then. 6 a.m., the cabin. We go find page 7. And whatever happens, we make sure the truth comes out." Evelyn ended the call and sat in the dark watching the parking lot, waiting for morning to come so they could walk into whatever trap Holloway was setting for them. Because that's what Hartwells did. They didn't back down, even when they should. Especially when they should. They stood their ground and fought for what was theirs, and sometimes they died for it. But they never ever quit. Outside, Pine Hollow slept under a sky full of stars that had watched this mountain for millions of years and would watch it for millions more, indifferent to human struggles, indifferent to theft and murder and justice deferred. But Evelyn wasn't indifferent, and neither was the ghost of her grandfather murdered 75 years ago, still waiting for someone to care enough to find the truth. Tomorrow they'd go into the mine. Tomorrow they'd find what Clayton had hidden. And tomorrow, one way or another, this 75-year silence would end. She set her alarm for 5 a.m. and finally let herself sleep. Part 3. The Reckoning. The alarm went off at 5 a.m. in a motel room that smelled like old carpet and someone else's cigarette smoke. Evelyn woke with her hand already reaching for her phone, checking for messages. Threats, updates. Nothing new since the photo of the cabin last night. Nothing except the weight of what they were about to do. Claire was still sleeping, curled under blankets that were too thin for a mountain November. Her breathing was easier today, the antibiotics working finally. Small mercies. Evelyn let her sleep another 20 minutes while she showered in water that never quite got hot enough, and dressed in layers because the mine would be cold and damp and unforgiving. She read about Silver Creek Mine last night on the motel's unreliable Wi-Fi. Abandoned since 1932, when the silver played out and the company went bankrupt. 3 main shafts, multiple side chambers, structural integrity, questionable at best. 2 deaths in the 50s, when teenagers went exploring and a tunnel collapsed. The entrance was officially sealed in 1967, but judging from the photos, people had been breaking in for decades. Clayton had hidden page 7 somewhere in chamber 3, in a lockbox he and Warren used for hunting supplies. That was all the information they had. No map, no specific location. Just the memory of 2 men who'd hunted these mountains 80 years ago. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. Claire woke as Evelyn was packing their few belongings back into the car. Everything they owned fit in 2 duffel bags and a backpack. 4 months of homelessness had taught them to travel light. "Are we really going into a mine?" Claire asked. "We really are. What if it collapses? Then we'll be very careful not to let it collapse." Claire gave her a look that said she knew that wasn't an answer. But she got dressed anyway, took her medicine, and ate the granola bar Evelyn handed her without complaint. 11 years old and already learning that sometimes you did scary things because they needed doing. They drove to the cabin as the sun was just starting to think about rising. The logging road looked different in the pre-dawn darkness, more hostile. more like the forest was trying to keep them out. Evelyn's headlights caught eyes in the undergrowth. Deer, probably, or raccoons. Nothing human, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Roscoe's truck was already parked in the clearing when they arrived, along with another vehicle Evelyn didn't recognize, a newer SUV, clean and official looking. As she pulled up, Roscoe emerged from the cabin, and beside him was a woman in her late 40s wearing a sheriff's department jacket. Margot got out of her own car and made introductions. "Evie,